The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Buckingham Palace as Queen Camilla walked through the corridors she had grown to know so well. Her heels clicked against the polished stone, each step echoing in the vast hallways lined with centuries of royal portraits. She had been queen consort for several years now, but some mornings still felt surreal, as if she might wake up and find herself back in her old life, before the crown, before the constant scrutiny, before everything changed forever. Today was supposed to be different. Today was the unveiling of the newly restored Queen Charlotte wing, a project that had taken 3 years and millions of pounds to complete. Queen Charlotte, the wife of King George III, had always held a special place in royal history, and this restoration was meant to honor her legacy while showcasing the monarchy's commitment to preserving British heritage. Camilla had personally overseen many aspects of the project, working closely with historians, architects, and designers to ensure every detail was perfect. The Queen Charlotte wing had been closed to the public for decades, its rooms filled with dust and memories, its treasures hidden away from the world. But now, after careful restoration, it was ready to shine again. The wing would house a new exhibition about Queen Charlotte's life, her contributions to the arts, and her role in shaping royal traditions that continued to this day. For Camilla, this project represented something deeply personal, a chance to leave her own positive mark on royal history, to be remembered for something beautiful and meaningful rather than just the controversy that had followed her for so many years. As she made her way to the Queen Charlotte wing, Camilla reflected on how far she had come. The early days of her marriage to Charles had been incredibly difficult. The British public had not been kind, and the media had been even harsher. She was constantly compared to Diana, constantly criticized, constantly reminded that many people felt she didn't belong in the royal family. But gradually, through years of dedicated service and genuine care for her royal duties, she had begun to win people over. Her work with literacy charities, her support for domestic violence survivors, and her natural warmth had slowly changed public opinion. The Queen Charlotte Wing project had been her idea from the beginning. She had discovered the forgotten rooms during one of her early explorations of the palace, and something about the space had captured her imagination. Queen Charlotte had been a fascinating woman, a patron of the arts, a devoted mother to 15 children, and a queen who had navigated the challenges of royal life with grace and intelligence. In many ways, Camilla felt a connection to her predecessor, understanding the unique pressures of being a queen who came to her role later in life. The restoration had been meticulous. Every piece of furniture had been carefully cleaned and repaired by expert craftsmen. Faded tapestries had been painstakingly restored to their original colors. Portraits had been cleaned until the subjects seemed to glow with life once again. The crown jewel of the exhibition was Queen Charlotte's personal writing desk, where she had penned thousands of letters to friends, family, and political figures of her time. Camilla had spent hours studying these letters, gaining insight into the mind of a woman who had lived through some of the most turbulent times in British history. The media interest in the project had been intense from the beginning. Royal watchers and history enthusiasts were eager to see the restored rooms and learn more about Queen Charlotte's story. Several documentary crews had been granted access to film the restoration process, and major newspapers had published lengthy articles about the historical significance of the project. For once, Camilla found herself at the center of entirely positive attention, and she was determined to make the most of it. This morning's event was meant to be the crowning achievement of months of planning. Distinguished guests, including historians, members of parliament, and representatives from various cultural institutions, had been invited to tour the newly restored wing. The Archbishop of Canterbury would offer a blessing for the space, and Camilla herself would deliver a speech about the importance of preserving royal heritage for future generations. As she approached the entrance to the Queen Charlotte wing, Camilla could hear the buzz of conversation from the assembled guests. Through the tall windows, she could see photographers setting up their equipment, and reporters checking their notes one final time. Everything seemed perfect, exactly as she had envisioned it would be. But as she reached for the ornate door handle, something felt different. The usual bustle of palace staff seemed more urgent than normal. She noticed several security officers speaking in hushed tones, their expressions serious and concerned. A cold feeling began to settle in her stomach as she realized that something was very wrong. Her private secretary, Margaret, appeared at her side with an expression that Camilla had learned to recognize over the years. It was the look that preceded bad news, the careful mask that palace staff wore, when they had to deliver information that would upset the carefully planned order of royal life. "Your Majesty," Margaret said quietly, "we need to speak privately before the ceremony begins." Camilla's heart began to race, though she kept her expression calm and composed. Years of royal training had taught her to never show distress in public, no matter what crisis might be unfolding behind the scenes. She nodded gracefully and followed Margaret to a small antechamber, adjacent to the Queen Charlotte wing. Once the door was closed and they were alone, Margaret's professional composure cracked slightly. "Ma'am, there's been a discovery. During the final preparations this morning, one of the conservation specialists found something hidden behind Queen Charlotte's writing desk. Something that, well, it changes everything we thought we knew about her." Camilla felt the blood drain from her face. "What kind of discovery?" Margaret handed her a sealed envelope. Its edges yellowed with age. The royal seal was still visible, though faded. "Letters, Your Majesty. Private correspondence that was apparently hidden away for over 2 centuries. The historian who examined them initially says they reveal aspects of Queen Charlotte's life that were never meant to become public knowledge." With trembling hands, Camilla opened the envelope and began to read. The elegant handwriting of Queen Charlotte filled the pages, but the content was unlike anything in her published correspondence. These letters spoke of secret meetings, of political manipulation, of personal relationships that contradicted everything historians had written about the beloved queen. There were references to bribes paid to secure favorable treatment for certain nobles, suggestions of blackmail used against political enemies, and, most shocking of all, evidence of a long-term affair that had produced a child whose existence had been completely hidden from history. As Camilla read, she realized the magnitude of what had been discovered. These letters painted Queen Charlotte not as the virtuous queen that history remembered, but as a woman who had used deception, manipulation, and scandal to maintain her power and protect her position. If these letters were authentic, and the preliminary examination suggested they were, then the entire foundation of the Queen Charlotte Wing exhibition was built on a lie. "How many people know about this?" Camilla asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "So far, just a conservation specialist who found them, the historian who did the initial examination, and myself," Margaret replied. "But, Your Majesty, we have a room full of guests, media representatives, and dignitaries waiting for the ceremony to begin. What do you want to do?" Camilla's mind raced through the possibilities. She could proceed with the ceremony as planned and deal with the scandal later, but if the letters became public after the celebration, the backlash would be devastating. The media would accuse her of deliberately hiding the truth, of participating in a cover-up. Her reputation, which she had worked so hard to rebuild, would be destroyed overnight. On the other hand, canceling the ceremony at the last minute would create its own scandal. Guests had traveled from around the world for this event. The media was expecting a major story, and disappointing them would only make them more determined to find out what had gone wrong. Questions would be asked, investigations would be launched, and eventually, the truth about the letters would come out anyway. "Your Majesty," Margaret said gently, "I need to know what you want me to tell the guests." Camilla looked at the letters again, studying Queen Charlotte's elegant handwriting. Despite the shocking content, there was something almost admirable about the long-dead queen's determination to protect herself and her family at all costs. In a time when women had little power, Queen Charlotte had found ways to exert influence and control her own destiny. Perhaps the methods were questionable, but the motivation was understandable. "How long do we have before the ceremony is scheduled to begin?" Camilla asked. 15 minutes, Your Majesty. 15 minutes to choose between potential scandal now or certain disaster later. 15 minutes to decide whether to honor a queen's memory or expose her secrets to the world. As Camilla stood in the small antechamber, holding letters that could destroy everything she had worked to build, she realized that this moment would be remembered as the turning point in her time as queen. Whatever choice she made in the next few minutes would echo through history, shaping not only her own legacy, but the way future generations viewed the monarchy itself. The sound of voices from the Queen Charlotte wing grew louder, reminding her that a room full of important people was waiting for her to appear, to smile, to play her part in the carefully choreographed theater of royal life. But now, with these damning letters in her hands, everything had changed. Margaret was watching her carefully, waiting for instructions, ready to implement whatever decision the Queen made. The palace staff were experts at managing crises, at spinning stories and controlling narratives, but this was different. This wasn't just a minor scandal or a problematic photograph. This was history itself being rewritten. And there might be no way to control what happened next. Camilla took a deep breath and looked at her reflection in the ornate mirror that hung on the antechamber wall. She saw a woman who had survived decades of public scrutiny, who had transformed herself from one of the most hated figures in Britain to a respected member of the royal family. She had weathered storms that would have destroyed others, had found strength she never knew she possessed, had learned to carry the weight of a crown with dignity and grace. Now she faced perhaps the greatest test of her reign, and her decision would determine not only her own future, but the future of the monarchy itself. The next few hours would either cement her reputation as a queen who could handle any crisis with wisdom and integrity, or destroy everything she had worked so hard to achieve. As the clock ticked toward the scheduled start of the ceremony, Camilla Parker Bowles, Queen Consort of the United Kingdom, prepared to make the most important decision of her royal life. Camilla folded the damaging letters carefully and placed them back in the envelope. Her hands were steady now, her mind clear. Years of navigating royal protocol and public scrutiny had taught her that in moments of crisis, hesitation was often more dangerous than action. She looked directly at Margaret, her expression resolute. "We proceed with the ceremony as planned," she said firmly, "but we need to control this situation immediately. I want those letters secured in the Royal Archive within the hour, and I want a complete historical analysis conducted by our most trusted experts before anyone else sees them." Margaret nodded, understanding the gravity of the decision. "And if questions arise about the discovery, Your Majesty?" "Then we tell the truth. That ongoing conservation work continues to reveal new aspects of royal history, and all discoveries are being properly catalogued and studied by qualified historians." Camilla's voice carried the authority that came with her position, but Margaret could see the tension in her shoulders. As they left the antechamber and walked toward the Queen Charlotte wing, Camilla's mind was already working through the implications of her choice. She had decided to buy time, to gather information before making any public statements about the letters. It was a calculated risk, but one that gave her the best chance of controlling the narrative. When the story inevitably broke, the doors to the Queen Charlotte wing opened, and Camilla stepped into the beautifully restored space. The assembled guests turned toward her with respectful smiles. Cameras flashed, and the familiar rhythm of royal ceremony began. She moved through the crowd with practiced grace, shaking hands, making small talk, and admiring the restoration work that had consumed so much of her time and energy over the past 3 years. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, the lead historian on the project, approached with obvious excitement. "Your Majesty, the response has been overwhelming. The guests are absolutely fascinated by Queen Charlotte's story, and several institutions have already expressed interest in collaborative exhibitions." Camilla smiled warmly, though inside she felt a pang of guilt knowing what she now knew about the queen they were celebrating. "Hartwell, your work has been exceptional. Queen Charlotte's legacy will inspire future generations thanks to your dedication." As the tour continued, Camilla found herself studying Queen Charlotte's portraits with new eyes. The painted face that had once seemed benevolent and wise now appeared calculating and secretive. Every artifact in the exhibition, the writing desk where the letters had been hidden, the personal jewelry, the formal court dress, now carried the weight of hidden truth. The ceremony proceeded flawlessly. The Archbishop offered his blessing, praising Queen Charlotte as a model of royal virtue and dedication. Distinguished guests made speeches about the importance of preserving royal heritage. Camilla herself delivered her prepared remarks about Queen Charlotte's contributions to British culture and the arts, each word feeling heavier than usual as she spoke them. But even as she maintained her composure publicly, Camilla knew that time was not on her side. The conservation specialist who had discovered the letters was a respected professional, but palace staff were human beings with their own loyalties and interests. The historian who had examined them was bound by professional ethics but also by academic curiosity that might prove stronger than discretion. After the ceremony concluded and the last guests departed, Camilla immediately called an emergency meeting with her most trusted advisors. The group that gathered in her private study included Margaret, the palace's head of communications Sir Reginald Thornbury, the royal household's legal counsel, and Dr. James Morrison, the monarchy's official historian. "I need complete honesty from all of you," Camilla began without preamble. "We're facing a potential crisis that could damage not only my reputation but the institution of the monarchy itself."
She recounted the discovery of the letters and their shocking contents. As she spoke, she watched the faces of her advisors change from curiosity to concern to alarm. Sir Reginald, who had managed royal media relations for over 2 decades, looked particularly grave. "Your Majesty, if these letters are authentic and become public, the backlash will be immediate and severe," he said bluntly. "The media will focus not only on Queen Charlotte's actions but on our decision to proceed with today's ceremony. They'll claim we knew about the scandal and chose to celebrate her anyway." Dr. Morrison cleared his throat nervously. "With respect, Your Majesty, we need to consider the historical context. The 18th century was a different time, with different moral standards. What seems scandalous to us might have been acceptable then. That's exactly the kind of academic rationalization that the public will reject," Sir Reginald countered. "They won't care about historical context. They'll see corruption, adultery, and cover-ups, and they'll wonder what else the royal family is hiding."
The legal counsel, Patricia Hammond, had been quietly reviewing photocopies of the letters.
"The bigger concern is the precedent this sets. If we're seen as whitewashing royal history, every future exhibition, every royal biography, every official statement will be questioned. The public's trust in our transparency will be permanently damaged." Camilla listened to the debate with growing frustration. Each advisor raised valid points, but none offered clear solutions. The letters existed, their contents were damaging, and eventually, they would become public knowledge. The only question was whether the royal household would control that revelation or be victimized by it. "What about authentication?" she asked. "Is there any possibility these letters are forgeries?" Dr. Morrison shook his head. "The paper, ink, and handwriting all appear consistent with Queen Charlotte's known correspondence. The historical details mentioned in the letters align with documented events of the period. While a final authentication will take weeks, preliminary analysis strongly suggests they're genuine." Sir Reginald leaned forward in his chair. "Your Majesty, I believe we have perhaps 48 hours before rumors begin circulating. Palace staff are discreet, but they're not blind. Too many people were involved in this morning's discovery, and eventually, someone will talk." The room fell silent as everyone contemplated the implications. 48 hours to decide how to handle a scandal that could reshape public perception of the monarchy. 48 hours to choose between transparency and damage control. "There is another consideration," Patricia Hammond said quietly. "The content of these letters suggests Queen Charlotte may have committed criminal acts by the standards of her time. If we suppress this information and it later emerges, we could be seen as accessories to historical cover-ups." Camilla felt the weight of the crown more heavily than ever before. Every decision carried enormous consequences, not just for her personally, but for an institution that had endured for over 1,000 years. The monarchy's survival had always depended on its ability to adapt and evolve, to acknowledge mistakes while maintaining dignity and authority. "I want options," she said finally. "Real, practical options for handling this situation. We meet again tomorrow morning, and I expect each of you to present a detailed strategy." As her advisors filed out, Camilla remained in her study, staring at the envelope containing Queen Charlotte's letters. She thought about the irony of the situation. A queen who had fought to preserve her reputation and power, whose secrets had now emerged to threaten another queen's legacy centuries later. The next morning brought unwelcome news. Sir Reginald arrived at the emergency meeting looking haggard, his usually perfect appearance disheveled. "Your Majesty, we have a problem. The Daily Mirror has received a tip about shocking discoveries at yesterday's ceremony. They're asking pointed questions about Queen Charlotte's letters." Camilla's heart sank. Someone had leaked information already, destroying their timeline and forcing them into reactive mode. How much do they know? Not everything, but enough to be dangerous. They know letters were found, they know the content is controversial, and they're prepared to run a story whether we cooperate or not. The legal counsel looked up from her notes. "If they publish inaccurate information, we could pursue legal action, but that would only confirm there's a story to be told." Dr. Morrison had prepared his own analysis overnight. "Your Majesty, I've been researching similar situations throughout royal history. When scandals emerge about long-dead monarchs, the current royal family's response becomes more important than the original scandal. How we handle this will determine the long-term impact."
Margaret had been working with the palace's digital team to monitor social media and news outlets. The story hasn't broken yet, but there's chatter among royal watchers. Several accounts are speculating about why the queen looked tense during yesterday's ceremony. Camilla realized they had reached the point of no return. Whatever strategy they chose would have to be implemented immediately, before the media narrative spun completely out of their control. Sir Reginald, what's your recommendation? Controlled disclosure, Your Majesty. We release a carefully worded statement acknowledging the discovery of previously unknown letters, emphasizing our commitment to historical accuracy and promising a full scholarly review. We get ahead of the story instead of chasing it, and if the full contents of the letters become public, then we pivot to context and perspective. We emphasize that these revelations don't diminish our respect for Queen Charlotte's overall contributions, and we use this as an opportunity to demonstrate the monarchy's commitment to transparency and historical truth. The strategy was risky but logical. By acknowledging the discovery proactively, they could frame the narrative around responsible historical research rather than scandalous cover-ups. It would still be damaging, but potentially manageable. Camilla looked around the room at faces that reflected her own anxiety and determination. These people had dedicated their careers to serving the monarchy, and now they were being asked to navigate uncharted waters with no guarantee of success. Draft the statement, she decided. We release it at 3 o'clock today, before the evening news cycle. And Sir Reginald, I want to review every word personally. As her team scattered to implement the plan, Camilla remained behind to contemplate what she had just set in motion. In a few hours, she would deliberately damage her own reputation and invite public scrutiny that could follow her for the rest of her reign. But the alternative, being caught in a cover-up, would be far worse. She thought about Queen Charlotte, dead for over 2 centuries, whose secrets were about to reshape the present. The irony was bitter. In trying to honor one queen's legacy, Camilla had uncovered truths that now threatened her own. The afternoon passed in a blur of preparation and anxiety. The statement was drafted, reviewed, and finalized. Media contacts were prepared for the inevitable follow-up questions. Palace staff were briefed on how to respond to inquiries. At exactly 3 o'clock, the official statement was released to the press, and Camilla's world changed forever. The statement hit the media like a thunderbolt. Within minutes of its release, news outlets across Britain and around the world were reporting the stunning revelation that Queen Charlotte's hidden letters contained evidence of scandal and corruption. The carefully worded palace announcement, which had attempted to frame the discovery in terms of historical scholarship and transparency, was quickly overwhelmed by sensational headlines and breathless speculation. Camilla watched the coverage unfold from her private quarters, feeling a mixture of dread and relief. The secret was out, but at least they had controlled the initial telling. Sir Reginald provided regular updates as the story gained momentum throughout the evening, each report more dramatic than the last. The BBC is leading with Royal Scandal Rocks Palace exhibition, he reported grimly. Sky News has Queen Charlotte's dark secrets exposed. The tabloids will be much worse tomorrow. As night fell, Camilla realized that her life had fundamentally changed. She was no longer just dealing with the discovery of historical documents. She was now at the center of a royal crisis that would test every aspect of her character and judgment. The next few days would determine whether she emerged from this scandal as a queen who could weather any storm, or whether it would define her reign in the worst possible way. The morning brought the full force of media scrutiny. The front pages of every major newspaper carried the story, with headlines that ranged from the relatively restrained "Palace Reveals Royal Letters Scandal" to the more sensational "Camilla's Cover-Up Crisis." Television news programs led with the story, featuring expert panels debating everything from Camilla's handling of the situation to the broader implications for the monarchy. But it was the public reaction that proved most challenging. Social media erupted with criticism, much of it directed not at the long-dead Queen Charlotte but at Camilla herself. The timing of her decision to proceed with the ceremony after learning about the letters became a focal point for anger and suspicion. She knew and celebrated anyway. Read one viral tweet that garnered thousands of shares. "What else is the royal family hiding from us?" Another popular post declared, "Typical Camilla, always putting her own interests before the truth." The hashtag #CamillaKnew began trending,
accompanied by memes and angry comments that painted her as either incompetent or deliberately deceptive. The careful distinction between Queen Charlotte's actions and Camilla's response was lost in the fury of public opinion. Margaret brought the morning papers to Camilla's breakfast table with obvious reluctance. The images were painful, photographs of Camilla smiling at the previous day's ceremony, now accompanied by headlines suggesting she had been celebrating a lie. The contrast between her apparent happiness in the photos and the grim reality of what she had learned made her appear either foolishly naive or coldly calculating. "Your Majesty," Margaret said gently, "Sir Reginald has scheduled a crisis meeting for 9 o'clock. The communications team believes we need to respond quickly to counter the narrative that's developing." Camilla nodded, though part of her wanted to retreat from the world entirely. She had weathered public criticism before, but this felt different. This wasn't about her personal choices or her path to the throne. This was about her judgment as queen, her ability to handle the responsibilities that came with the crown. The crisis meeting revealed the full scope of the challenge facing the royal household. Opinion polls conducted overnight showed a significant drop in public approval for both Camilla personally and the monarchy as an institution. Several members of parliament had called for investigations into palace transparency and record-keeping. Republican groups were using the scandal to argue for the abolition of the monarchy entirely. "The core problem is trust," Sir Reginald explained to the assembled team. "The public feels deceived, not just about Queen Charlotte, but about our willingness to be honest about royal history. Every statement we make now will be scrutinized for signs of further cover-ups or manipulation." Dr. Morrison had spent the night researching the historical context of Queen Charlotte's letters, hoping to find ways to minimize their impact. The political arrangements Queen Charlotte made were not unusual for her time, he argued. Monarchs regularly used personal relationships and financial incentives to maintain political stability. What seems corrupt to modern eyes was actually standard diplomatic practice in the 18th century. But Patricia Hammond, the legal counsel, shook her head. "That argument won't work with the public. They're not interested in historical context. They want to know why we celebrated a queen who engaged in what they see as bribery and adultery." Camilla listened to the debate with growing frustration. Her advisors were focused on damage control and public relations, but she knew the real issue went deeper than media management. The monarchy's credibility depended on public trust, and that trust had been seriously damaged by her decision to proceed with the ceremony. "What about the conservation specialist who found the letters?" she asked. "Has anyone spoken to him about what happened?" Margaret consulted her notes. "David Wellington. He's worked on royal projects for 15 years and has an excellent reputation. He's been approached by several media outlets, but has declined to comment so far. I want to meet with him personally," Camilla decided. "If we're going to rebuild trust, it starts with being honest about what happened and why decisions were made." Sir Reginald looked alarmed. "Your Majesty, direct contact with a staff member involved in the scandal could be seen as an attempt to influence his testimony if there are official inquiries. Then let there be inquiries," Camilla replied firmly. "I'm not interested in hiding from what happened. I made a decision under pressure, and I'll stand by it. But I won't have good people like Mr. Wellington caught in the crossfire of a media storm." The meeting continued for 2 hours, with various strategies proposed and debated. Some advisors favored a defensive approach, minimizing Camilla's involvement and emphasizing the historical nature of the discoveries. Others pushed for a more aggressive stance, attacking the media's sensationalism and defending the monarchy's overall record of public service. But Camilla found herself drawn to a different approach entirely. As she listened to the arguments and watched the ongoing coverage, she realized that this crisis offered an unexpected opportunity. For years, she had been criticized for lacking transparency, for being too protective of royal traditions and secrets. Now she had a chance to demonstrate a different kind of leadership, one based on honesty, accountability, and genuine engagement with public concerns. "I want to give a television interview," she announced, surprising everyone in the room. The reaction was immediate and unanimous. Her advisors thought it was a terrible idea. Television interviews during royal crises were notoriously risky, offering opportunities for hostile questioning and potential gaffes that could make bad situations worse. "Your Majesty," Sir Reginald said carefully, "with respect, the media environment is extremely hostile right now. Any interview would be focused on finding contradictions or admissions that could be used against you.
Then I'll make sure there are no contradictions, Camilla replied. I'll tell the truth about what I knew, when I knew it, and why I made the decisions I did.
The public deserves to hear directly from me, not through carefully crafted statements and palace spokespeople. So, the risk is enormous, Your Majesty. One wrong word, one moment of apparent evasiveness, and the situation becomes much worse. Camilla stood and walked to the window, looking out at the crowds of reporters and photographers gathered outside the palace gates. For decades, she had been the subject of their attention, their cameras capturing her every public moment, their questions probing every aspect of her life. She had learned to navigate that scrutiny, but always from behind the protective barrier of royal protocol and carefully managed public appearances. I've spent years trying to earn the public's trust through service and dedication, she said, still looking out the window. But perhaps what they really want is simple honesty. Not royal pronouncements or palace statements, but a straightforward explanation from someone willing to admit mistakes and take responsibility for them. The room fell silent as her advisors contemplated the implications of what she was proposing. A candid television interview would be unprecedented for a reigning queen consort facing a crisis of this magnitude. It would either demonstrate remarkable courage and leadership, or it would provide ammunition for her critics and potentially end her effectiveness as a royal figure. Dr. Morrison spoke first. Your Majesty, if you're determined to do this, we need to ensure the historical record is absolutely clear. I can provide detailed context about Queen Charlotte's era and the standards that applied then.
Patricia Hammond nodded reluctantly. And we'll need to prepare for every possible legal question.
If there are suggestions of cover-ups or institutional failures, you'll need precise, factual responses. Sir Reginald remained skeptical, but began thinking strategically. If we're doing this, we control the format. One interviewer, pre-agreed topics, recorded rather than live to allow for editing if absolutely necessary. Over the following days, preparations for the interview consumed the palace. Every aspect of Queen Charlotte's letters was analyzed and verified. Historical experts were consulted to provide context for the shocking revelations. Legal advisors prepared responses to potential accusations of institutional misconduct. Meanwhile, the media storm continued to rage. New details about Queen Charlotte's letters emerged daily, each revelation generating fresh rounds of criticism and speculation. Political opponents of the monarchy seized on the scandal to question the entire system of hereditary privilege. Even some traditional supporters of the royal family expressed disappointment with Camilla's handling of the situation. But something else was happening as well. Among the criticism and anger, voices of support began to emerge. Some commentators praised Camilla's decision to release the information voluntarily, rather than waiting for it to leak. Others argued that judging historical figures by modern standards was unfair and counterproductive. A particularly influential editorial in the Times suggested that the real test of leadership was not whether scandals occurred, but how they were handled when they did. Queen Camilla finds herself in an impossible situation, the editorial read. She can either retreat behind palace walls and hope the storm passes, or she can engage directly with public concerns and demonstrate the kind of transparent leadership that the monarchy needs in the 21st century. As the interview date approached, Camilla spent hours in preparation, reviewing every aspect of the Queen Charlotte case and considering how to present her decisions in the most honest and compelling way possible. She knew that this single conversation would likely define her reign more than any ceremonial duty or charitable work she had done. The night before the interview, she sat alone in her study, reading Queen Charlotte's letters one final time. Despite their shocking content, she found herself feeling a strange kinship with the long-dead queen. Both women had faced impossible choices under enormous pressure. Both had been forced to navigate the complex demands of royal life while protecting themselves and their families. The difference was that Queen Charlotte had hidden her secrets, while Camilla had chosen to expose them. Tomorrow, she would face the consequences of that choice, and the world would judge whether she had the strength and wisdom to lead the monarchy into its uncertain future. As dawn broke over London, Queen Camilla prepared to face the most important interview of her life, knowing that her words would echo through history and determine not only her own legacy, but the future of the institution she served. The stakes could not be higher, and there would be no second chances.